So it's a real pleasure to be here, and a very interesting time to be here. I think we live in exciting times, as the old saying goes, not just in terms of the big steps that we're seeing in terms of new nuclear build, which are obviously crucially important nationally for our whole energy mix and indeed to support the broader growth agenda in the UK. But talk of energy review, which I'm sure the Minister, when she comes later on, will talk about, and indeed in decommissioning. I'm going to talk a little bit about decommissioning, and Tom will talk about it. But decommissioning, I think, is an end in itself, really important to tidy up the legacy of history. But it's also a key enabler for new build. I passionately believe that if we're not tidying away our old toys, we really don't have the right to get out some new toys. And I think from a public acceptance point of view, continuing with the decommissioning mission is an essential enabler to the new build agenda. The NDA is 10 years old now, or 10 and a half years old, and really there's four activities that we've been engaged in, four aims that we've had at a high level. It's trying to make sure we've got the right strategy and plans in place across the entire estate that are integrated, that are seen publicly and that we can explain. Trying to make sure that we've got the right funding in place, and I'm going to talk about funding in some more detail in a moment, obviously a very topical issue. Making sure we've got the right delivery arrangements in place to use that funding to deliver those plans and eventually deliver that strategy. And then, of course, to make sure that delivery is being made, and particularly to make sure that we're maximising the use of the supply chain. So they're the four main areas that we've focused on in our 10 years. A bit of a look back and a bit of a look forward. In terms of the first one, we're about to launch our third strategy. We're obliged under the Energy Act to publish a strategy every 5 years. We'll be going out to consultation in the first week of January on the latest review of the strategy. That's been delayed a little to take account of the spending review outcome. We'll also be consulting on our business plan, which will identify exactly what we intend to do over the coming year with a little bit of look ahead. We're finalising the details of precisely what goes into that business plan at the moment. And indeed, I'm afraid immediately after Tom and I have finished here, I have to leave. Our board is meeting as we speak, started at 9 o'clock this morning, where we're looking at exactly what happens with the spending settlement that we've got and how we feed that into our plans going forward. So I think we've made a good progress in terms of having lifetime plans across the estate that are visible, that give people the ability to forward plan in terms of what's happening. In terms of funding, I think we've had a bit of a rocky road over the 10 years. We've seen some ups and downs, and I guess many of you have seen some of the stops and starts that we've had. But as a result of the announcement last week, which John Hutton has spoken about, I think we're in a good place for the next 4 to 5 years. So the spending settlement at headline level, £11 billion of grant from government over the next 5 years. Alongside that, we get around about £5 billion worth of commercial income. That income is declining as things like Wilver, our one remaining Magnox station, come off the bars at the end of this month. But there is still a fairly strong income base there. So we have a good, strong level of funding going forward. And I think that shows government's continuing commitment to the decommissioning mission. And I think a recognition that value is being delivered and progress is being made. So I think it's a sign of real support. I'm enormously grateful for the tremendous support we've had. I don't think we're allowed to talk about lobbying, but certainly the support we've had from a whole range of people, the NIA, individual companies within that, our licensed companies, trade unions, local politicians who represent the sites within which we operate around the nation. And as a result of that, I think we've ended up with a good outcome. There is a slight sting in the tail, and that sting in the tail is that we are obliged to deliver £1 billion of savings over that period. So we haven't got all the money that we looked for, but we have got a sum of money that I believe is manageable and allows us to make broad front progress across all of our sites. I was concerned that we would be faced with having to make really difficult crash stop decisions on major programs of work. That is not the case. We are able to make broad front decommissioning. We will not be interrupting any of the major programs, but we will have to drive out efficiency through the supply chain and through the self-performed work in the licensed companies. So there is a significant challenge for us, but I think we start from a very good place. So the details of precisely where that money will be divvied up will be in our business plan in January, and I say we're working on it literally as we speak. In terms of the delivery arrangements, we've put in place arrangements across all of the sites. I'll just run through them very quickly in turn. So at Dounreay in the north of Scotland, we run a competition for a parent body organisation. That's been in place now for a few years, the Cavendish-Dounreay partnership, delivering well. We've had to make some changes to some of the scope up there to take account of some additional work that government has asked us to do involved with moving some materials from Dounreay to Sellafield. That's been tricky and provided some challenges, but it's bedded in now, making good progress. I expect to see material moving in the near future. Very good progress on things like the low-level waste vaults, large construction projects with some difficult socio-economic issues, but good progress, I think, being made up there. So I think we have Dounreay in a stable position, and I think the funding that we're able to provide over the next 4 to 5 years, and hopefully beyond that, will allow us to make sustained progress up there. In terms of the Magnox sites, we ran a competition for the Magnox and what was the research sites, now the combined 12 sites for Magnox. That competition was awarded last year to the Cavendish Fluor Partnership. We're still in the consolidation phase for that, just working through the detail of exactly what the state of the sites was when they came in compared to what we thought it would be when we ran the competition. Taking a little bit longer than we'd hoped, but we are making good progress. And we'll be through that by the start of the next financial year. But on the ground, real progress being made in terms of ponds being drained, sites being defueled, huge asbestos being stripped. And on Wilver, which I'd like to single out, the things like the inter-reactor fuel transfer that's allowed us to squeeze every last bit of juice out of the fuel at Wilver. Really groundbreaking stuff, Institute of Physics prizes, and really brought in a huge amount of benefit to the NDA and therefore to the taxpayer. But all good things come to an end. And Wilver will close on the 30th of December this year, when finally there is just no more fuel left. But a phenomenal success, and I'd really like to pay tribute to the team who've worked there and the huge number of people who've supported them. The low-level waste repository in West Cumbria, a fundamental shift there. That's been operating under UK Nuclear Waste Management Partners, a consortium, but a real shift from 85% of low-level waste that's generated going to be buried at Drigg to now, sorry, I shouldn't say at Drigg, at the low-level waste repository near Drigg, just in case there are any residents of Drigg around. They do point out there is more to their village than the repository, which is true. So moving from 85% being disposed of in the repository to now 85% being diverted away from the repository through reuse, recycling, and other means of disposal. So a real success that keeps that facility open way into the future. And then last but no means least, Sellafield, by far and away the biggest and most complex site and set of programs that we have. Tom will talk about some of the details in a moment. But a couple of things I just talk about there. We announced a change of the model in terms of the management of Sellafield. The Secretary of State announced it in the House in January, and we enacted that decision from the 1st of April. We're through the transition phase, or in the transition phase now, and we'll conclude by the 1st of April next year. And at that point, we will move away from having a parent body organisation at Sellafield, and Sellafield will be a subsidiary organisation owned by the NDA, but enhanced by the market. So this is not the exclusion of the private sector, far from it. It's the engagement of the private sector in a different way. And the key reasons for doing that is the uncertainty of the scope at Sellafield, the unpredictability of performance, and the contract that we had was effectively a cost-plus contract, not able to drive quite the benefits that we wanted. Transition going very well. I'd really like to thank Nuclear Management Partners, who are the outgoing PBO, who are assisting that, working very professionally, very cooperatively on that. But really good progress on transition. And on the ground, more importantly, a maintenance on progress and on safety. The safety record remains very good. Progress remains very positive. We're seeing real demonstrable progress on some of the legacy ponds and silos, the big high hazard facilities on the site. I won't steal Tom's thunder for some of the tremendous things that they're doing there, but really seeing delivery on the ground, which is what it's all about. Just a few things then on the final piece, which is about ensuring delivery and the supply chain. The NDA is a strange beast in many respects. We don't do any nuclear decommissioning. The Nuclear Decommissioning Authority is someone who does the things that I've spoken about, plans, funding, enabling arrangements, etc. The operations are done by the license companies, and a very substantial part of those operations are done by the supply chain. We spend about £3 billion per year. It's an enormous sum of public money. £1.8 billion of that is spent in the supply chain, so significantly more than half. We've spent £12 billion in the supply chain since 2005, and the amount of money spent in the supply chain has gone up from about £1 billion, a little less than £1 billion per year, to £1.8 billion a year now. We currently engage more than 3,500 companies across the estate, and about half of those, a little over half of those, 1,900, are small, medium enterprises. So we're constantly trying to make sure that we're doing things to support the supply chain, and particularly SMEs. I guess many of you have featured at our supply chain conference, November each year, pretty much the biggest supply chain conference in Europe that it's become now. We now procure 25% of our purchases across the estate through the Shared Services Alliance, a collaborative procurement across all the licensed companies, and indeed outside into other parts of government, using Crown Commercial Services and others. So we're trying to drive better value and provide better plans as we go forward. And we're also trying to play our part in helping the supply chain on the export front. There's many examples of that, but if I take Japan as an example, which is very topical because of the tragic events at Fukushima a few years ago, we've been directly supporting Fukushima and the Japanese industry through various activities. Adrian Simper, our Strategy and Technology Director, has flown back overnight to join our board this morning from Japan. But also with people like INS, our subsidiary that has an office in Japan, and working with UKTI and the FCO and others, where we're trying to help enable UK firms get a further foothold into the Japanese market. And we've seen a number of successes on that in terms of some of the big companies, Amec Foster Wheeler, Cavendish, some of the medium-sized companies, if you like, James Fisher Nuclear, for example, and some of the more niche operators, Oxford Technologies, Createch, React Engineering, delivering really key issues in there, and often really innovative approaches. At our supply chain conference, we focused on innovation this year. Very keen to see the supply chain bringing innovation to our industry. Innovation of two forms, really. Real high-tech innovation, doing things that haven't been done before, many examples of that, excuse me, of that. But also innovation of the sort that is bringing things that exist elsewhere in other sectors, in other parts of industry, and bringing them to bear in our place. And we've seen examples of that, possibly my favorite being a scallop dredging company, which now, bizarrely, is doing work both at Sellafield and Dounreay. So bringing something from a completely different environment and fairly low tech in to bring real benefit. So in terms of summing up, just a few final words. I think we have in place a good, strong strategy. You'll see the latest update of that for consultation in January, publication in April. I think we've got a good, coherent set of plans, and we understand how the industry works. We have a solid funding base upon which to work for the next 4 or 5 years, and I think that's a real sign of commitment from government. I think it's a real sign that we can give commitment to you in the supply chain, that there's a stable funding there. But I stress we do need to see value delivered from that. And we need to play our part, and we'll be looking for you to play your part in how we drive that delivery out. I think we are making progress on a broad range of fronts, because at the end of the day, it is absolutely about delivering those outcomes. And I come back to the point that I started with. I think that decommissioning is a noble end in itself. Removing some of the high hazards, some of the high risk facilities that we've got, that is a noble aim, and we're absolutely committed to it. But it has an additional benefit. It's tidying away the old toys to allow the new ones to come out. And I genuinely believe that our continued mission is providing a key enabler to the essential component of new nuclear build. Thank you very much.